The heavy barrel of a suppressed pistol pressed into the soft skin beneath Jin-ho's chin, forcing his head back against the cold brick of the alleyway. Rainwater mixed with the copper tang of blood in his mouth, dripping onto his silk tie. Across from him, a boy no older than 6 huddled over the motionless body of a woman in a tattered coat, his small hands shaking as they clutched a plastic dinosaur. "Do it," Jin-ho rasped, his eyes never leaving the child. "But if a single drop of his blood hits the pavement, I will pull your soul through your throat." The hammer clicked back. A second later the alley erupted, but not with the sound of a gunshot. A black SUV slammed into the brick mouth of the passage, and 3 men in tactical gear swarmed the pavement. Jin-ho didn't wait for the rescue. He lunged, his fingers locking around the assassin's wrist, the bones snapping with a wet pop that echoed against the damp walls. The most feared man in Seoul, a ghost who commanded a multi-billion-won empire from a throne of silence, was now kneeling in the grime of a backstreet for a boy who didn't even know his name. This moment of violence was the culmination of a descent that began 24 hours earlier, a journey from a cold glass office to the very bottom of the city's social ladder. For Jin-ho, the stakes weren't just about territory or the ledger anymore. They were about the ghost of a debt he thought he'd buried 20 years ago in a similar gutter. This is how the king of the underworld became the shield for the invisible, and why the entire syndicate was now burning to reclaim the boy he called son. Jin-ho adjusted his cufflinks as the elevator descended toward the parking garage. His reflection in the polished brass was a mask of iron, sharp jaw, eyes like flint, a suit that cost more than a small apartment. A vibration in his pocket stopped him. He pulled out a burner phone. A single image illuminated the screen, a woman standing in a soup kitchen line, holding a child. Around her neck hung a tarnished silver locket, the same locket Jin-ho had seen his own mother wear before the fire. The elevator doors hissed open. Jin-ho didn't head for his armored sedan. He walked toward the exit, his shoes clicking rhythmically on the concrete. "Cancel the board meeting?" he muttered into his earpiece. "I'm going for a walk." He found them in the Gyeoryong district, a labyrinth of corrugated metal and desperate shadows. The air smelled of wood smoke and old laundry. Jin-ho stood at the edge of a makeshift park where the boy, Min-soo, was kicking a deflated ball against a rusted fence. His mother, Hannah, sat on a crate nearby, her fingers stitching a torn sleeve. Jin-ho's hand went to the scar on his shoulder, the skin tightening. He moved forward, the charcoal wool of his coat wildly out of place. Hannah looked up, her needle pausing mid-air. She didn't see a benefactor, she saw a predator. She stood, pulling Min-soo behind her legs, her eyes darting for an escape route. "I'm not here to collect," Jin-ho said, his voice a low vibration. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a stack of high-denomination bills, wrapped in a simple rubber band. He didn't offer it with a smile. He dropped it on the crate like it was a burden he no longer wanted to carry. Hannah didn't touch it. She watched the way he stood, shoulders square, weight distributed for a fight. "People like you don't give," she whispered, her voice rough from the cold. "They only take until there's nothing left to bleed." Before Jin-ho could answer, a black sedan with tinted windows screeched around the corner, its tires kicking up gray slush. 4 men stepped out, their hands tucked into heavy leather jackets. They didn't look at Hannah. They looked at Jin-ho. The lead man, a brute with a jagged scar across his nose, spat on the ground. "The chairman wants to know why his top dog is playing in the dirt, Jin-ho. He thinks you've gone soft. He thinks maybe you're hiding something the syndicate needs." Jin-ho stepped in front of the mother and child, his frame blocking their view of the weapons being drawn. He felt a small, cold hand grab the fabric of his trousers. Min-soo was looking up at him, eyes wide, the plastic dinosaur gripped tight. If you believe that a man's worth is measured by who he protects when he has nothing to gain, hit the like button so this story reaches the ones who need to see it. Jin-ho didn't draw a weapon. He simply loosened his tie. "Tell the chairman that I'm taking a personal leave. And tell him that if any of you follow me, the next thing you'll feel is the weight of the earth on your chest." The lead brute laughed, reaching for a submachine gun tucked under his arm. Jin-ho didn't wait. He blurred forward, his palm striking the man's chin, sending his teeth through his tongue. The world exploded into a mess of lead and shattered glass. Jin-ho grabbed Hannah's arm, shoving her toward an alleyway. "Run. Don't look back until you hit the main road." He turned to face the remaining 3, his hands steady, his pulse a slow rhythmic drum in his ears. He took the first bullet in the shoulder, a grazing sting that only fueled the engine of his movement. He disarmed the second man with a wrist lock that sent the pistol skittering across the ice, then used the body as a shield against the third. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burnt powder. Within 60 seconds the alley was silent, save for the groan of the man with the broken jaw. Jin-ho didn't finish them. He looked toward the direction Hana and Min-soo had fled. He saw a trail of blood in the snow. It wasn't his. He sprinted, his heart hammering against his ribs, the iron mask finally beginning to crack. The trail led to a derelict warehouse on the edge of the docks, where the wind whistled through broken panes like a dying animal. Jin-ho found Hana slumped against a stack of rotting pallets, her hand pressed against her side. Red seeped through her fingers, staining the faded floral pattern of her coat. Min-soo was kneeling beside her, his face a mask of silent terror, his small chest heaving. Jin-ho dived beside them, his silk handkerchief already out to apply pressure. "You didn't run far enough," he rasped, his voice thick with a grit he hadn't felt in years. Hana gripped his wrist, her strength fading. They were waiting at the end of the street. "Not your men. Others." Her eyes searched his, a desperate, final plea. "The locket. It's not just a trinket. Inside, the microchip. My husband, he died to keep it from the chairman." She coughed, a spray of crimson hitting Jin-ho's white shirt. "Protect him. Please." Her grip loosened, her hand falling to the cold concrete. Min-soo let out a sound, a high, broken wail that cut through the roar of the wind. Jin-ho didn't move for a long moment. He stared at the silver locket around the woman's neck. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and unhooked the chain. "Hush," Jin-ho whispered to the boy, pulling him into the crook of his arm. "Hush now. We have to go." He stood up, the boy a light weight against his chest, but the chip in his pocket felt like a mountain. He looked at the entrance of the warehouse. 6 sets of headlights cut through the gloom, boxing them in. The syndicate hadn't just come for him. They had come for the one thing that could dismantle their entire operation. Jin-ho pulled a hidden compartment from his belt, revealing a sleek, matte black handgun. He checked the magazine. 12 rounds. If you believe that Min-soo deserves a life away from the shadows that killed his mother, drop a like so the algorithm knows this child's story matters. The first flash of a muzzle came from the catwalk above. Jin-ho dived behind a rusted forklift, shielding Min-soo with his own body. Spark rained down as bullets chewed into the metal. "Stay small," Jin-ho commanded the boy. He leaned out, firing 2 shots. 2 silhouettes tumbled from the heights, hitting the floor with heavy thuds. He moved with a lethal, fluid grace, a shadow among shadows. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for the only innocence left in his world. He reached the back exit, kicking the door open to reveal the black expanse of the harbor. "Stop right there, Jin-ho." A voice boomed from the darkness. It was Han, his second in command, the man who had shared his bread and his blood for a decade. Han stood by a sleek speedboat, his rifle leveled at Jin-ho's heart. "The chairman knows about the chip. He knows you have it. Give it to me and the boy lives. You know I don't want to do this." Jin-ho looked at the water, then at the man he once called a brother. He felt Min-soo's small hands tightening on his coat. "You already did it the moment you let them kill her, Han," Jin-ho said, his voice as cold as the depths below. He didn't lower his gun. He stepped toward the edge of the pier, the wind whipping his hair across his eyes. "The chairman thinks he owns the city. He thinks he owns me. He's about to find out that a man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous thing he's ever created." Jin-ho didn't wait for a reply. He grabbed Min-soo and stepped off the ledge, the icy water swallowing them both before a single shot could be fired. The water was a freezing fist that squeezed the air from Jin-ho's lungs. He kicked upward, one arm locked around Min-soo's waist, his boots feeling like lead weights. They broke the surface under the shadow of a rusted barge. Min-soo was gasping, his face blue-tinged, but he didn't scream. The silence of the boy was more haunting than any cry. Jin-ho hauled them onto a floating dock, his body shaking with a violent tremor. He didn't stop to rest. He dragged the boy into a service tunnel that led toward the city's industrial heart. "We have to stay moving," Jin-ho whispered, stripping off his heavy waterlogged coat and wrapping it around the shivering child. They emerged in an abandoned textile mill, a skeletal cathedral of iron and dust. Jin-ho found a dry corner behind a boiler. He pulled the silver locket from his pocket. With a sharp flick of his knife, the back popped open. A small, gold-plated chip sat nestled in the velvet. He didn't need a computer to know what was on it: the offshore accounts, the kill orders, the names of the politicians the syndicate owned. This was the chairman's soul, and Jin-ho held it in his palm. A soft clatter echoed from the far end of the mill. Jin-ho's head snapped up. He didn't reach for his gun. He realized he'd lost it in the harbor. He scanned the floor, his fingers closing around a heavy iron pipe. He stood, positioning himself in the center of the moonlight filtering through the skylight. I know you're there, Han. You always were a better tracker than a shooter. Han stepped from the shadows, his face a mask of grief. He wasn't holding his rifle. He held a simple combat knife. The chairman has my sister Jin-ho. He knew I'd hesitate. He knew we were close. Han stepped into the light, his eyes red-rimmed. If I don't bring him that chip and the boy by dawn, she dies. I don't have a choice. Jin-ho felt the weight of the iron pipe in his hand. Two men, bound by a decade of brotherhood, now separated by the whims of a monster. There's always a choice, Han. You just chose the one that lets you live with a ghost, Jin-ho said. He shifted his weight, his eyes tracking Han's feet. Han lunged. The knife flashed in the dark, a silver arc aimed at Jin-ho's throat. Jin-ho parried with the pipe, the clang of metal on metal ringing through the hollow mill. They traded blows in a desperate, silent dance. Blocks, strikes, the heavy thud of bodies hitting concrete. Jin-ho was older, his shoulder wound weeping red, but his resolve was a fortress. He caught Han's wrist, twisting it until the knife clattered away. He drove his forehead into Han's nose, the crunch of cartilage sharp in the air. Han fell back, gasping. Jin-ho didn't follow up. He stood over him, the iron pipe raised. Go back to him, Jin-ho rasped. Tell him you lost us in the water. Tell him we're dead. If you ever come for us again, I won't stop at your nose. Han looked up, a single tear cutting through the blood on his cheek. He nodded once, a jerky, broken movement, and disappeared into the shadows. Subscribe if you believe that true loyalty isn't to a boss, but to the people who trust you with their lives. Jin-ho slumped against the boiler, his breath hitching. He looked at Min-soo. The boy was staring at the locket, his small face illuminated by a sliver of moon. Is my mommy coming back? He asked, his voice a tiny, fragile thing. Jin-ho felt a crack in his chest that no armor could fix. He didn't lie. He couldn't. No, Min-soo. She's not. But I'm here. And I'm never going to let them touch you again. He reached out, his rough, scarred hand gently smoothing the boy's damp hair. The sound of a heavy door creaking open at the front of the mill froze him. It wasn't Han. It was the sound of a dozen boots. The chairman hadn't trusted Han to finish the job. The syndicate's cleaners, a unit of sociopaths with no sense of brotherhood, had arrived. Jin-ho looked at the maze of rusted machinery. He had no gun, one wounded shoulder, and a child to protect against a small army. He stood up, the iron pipe feeling light in his hand, a savage grin touching his lips. He wasn't a boss anymore. He was a wolf at the mouth of the den. The first cleaner stepped into the moonlight, the red dot of a laser sight dancing across the rusted pillars. Jin-ho didn't wait for the dot to find him. He threw a heavy wrench into a stack of metal drums, the clatter echoing through the mill. As the assassin turned toward the noise, Jin-ho dropped from a low-hanging pipe, the iron bar connecting with the man's skull with a sickening thud. He caught the man's submachine gun before it hit the floor, rolling behind a massive loom. Spread out, a voice barked. The chairman wants the boy alive for the DNA test, but Jin-ho is a kill on sight. Jin-ho's blood ran cold. DNA test? He looked at Min-soo, who was huddled under a cast-iron table. The silver locket wasn't just about the chip. It was about the child. He looked at the boy's eyes, the same almond shape as the chairman's. The same stubborn set of the jaw. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Min-soo wasn't just a witness. He was the chairman's grandson, the product of a son the chairman had murdered years ago. The chip was the inheritance and the boy was the vessel. If you believe that a child should never be used as a pawn in a monster's game, hit the like button so this story spreads like fire. Jin-ho checked the magazine. 30 rounds. He had to be surgical. He moved through the shadows of the textile machines, a phantom in a tattered suit. He took out the second cleaner with a short burst to the chest, then transitioned to the third, using the muzzle flash to mask his position. The mill was a symphony of chaos, screams, the staccato rhythm of gunfire, the hiss of steam from punctured pipes. He was down to 5 rounds when he saw the chairman. The old man stood at the entrance, leaning on a cane tipped with gold, his face a mask of aristocratic boredom. Beside him stood the lead brute with the broken jaw, holding a flare gun. Jin-ho, the chairman called out, his voice thin and reedy. You were always my favorite. So efficient. So cold. Give me the boy and I'll let you die with a shred of dignity. I'll even give you a proper funeral. Jin-ho stepped out of the shadows, the submachine gun leveled at the chairman's heart. He was covered in oil, blood, and the dust of the dead. "He's not a business asset, you old bastard. He's a person." The chairman smiled, a slow yellowed grin. "He's a Han. And Hans don't live in the dirt. They rule from the sky." He gestured to the brute. The flare gun hissed, a brilliant white light illuminating the entire mill. In that second of blindness, 3 cleaners lunged from the sides. Jin-ho fired, his last rounds finding their marks, but a heavy boot caught him in the ribs, sending him sprawling. He felt the cold steel of a blade bite into his thigh. He roared, his fingers finding the brute's throat, squeezing with the strength of a man who had already accepted his death. They rolled across the concrete, a mess of teeth and nails. Jin-ho felt the brute's thumbs digging into his eyes, the world blurring into a haze of red. With a final desperate heave, Jin-ho found his knife, the small blade he'd used to pop the locket. He drove it into the brute's neck. The spray was warm and thick. Jin-ho struggled to his feet, his vision swimming. He looked for Min-soo. The boy was gone. The cast-iron table was empty. He looked toward the chairman. The old man was walking toward a waiting limousine, a small, struggling bundle tucked under his arm. "No." Jin-ho tried to scream, but it came out as a wet wheeze. He collapsed to his knees, his hands clawing at the concrete, as the taillights of the limo faded into the morning mist. Jin-ho woke to the sound of a heart monitor, a steady rhythmic beep that felt like a nail being driven into his brain. He tried to sit up, but a hand pressed him back. He looked up into the eyes of Han. The enforcer's nose was taped, his face a mosaic of purple and yellow bruises. "Don't move," Han whispered. "You've got 3 broken ribs and enough stitches to make a quilt." "Where is he?" Jin-ho's voice was a jagged shard of glass. "The Iron Estate," Han said, looking at the floor. "The chairman has locked the place down. He's announcing the return of the heir to the board tonight. He's going to use the boy to solidify his power, then, well, you know what happens to heirs who aren't useful anymore once the documents are signed." Jin-ho ripped the 4 from his arm, the tape tearing skin. He didn't feel the pain. He felt the silver locket in his hand, still clutched tight even in sleep. He looked at the chip. "Is the sister safe?" Han nodded. "I got her out. She's at a safe house in Incheon. The chairman thinks I'm dead, Jin-ho. He thinks you are too." "Then we're ghosts," Jin-ho said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. He grabbed a black tactical vest from a chair and pulled it over his bandages. "And it's time we haunted the king." The Iron Estate sat on a cliff overlooking the Han River, a fortress of glass, granite, and blood. Jin-ho and Han moved through the perimeter woods like smoke. They didn't go for the gates. They went for the sheer cliff side, scaling the wet rock with their bare hands. Jin-ho's ribs screamed with every pull, but he pictured Min-soo's face, the dinosaur, the locket, the way he'd gripped his trousers. That memory was a fire that burned through the agony. They breached the terrace just as the gala was beginning inside. The elite of Seoul were there, sipping champagne while a child sat in a gilded cage in the center of the ballroom. Jin-ho saw him, Min-soo dressed in a miniature suit, his eyes red from crying, staring at the floor. The chairman stood over him, a hand on the boy's shoulder, a wolf claiming a lamb. "If you think the syndicate deserves to see their king fall in front of the world he bought, drop a like so justice finds its way home." Jin-ho didn't use a silencer this time. He kicked the massive glass doors in, the shards raining down like diamonds on the terrified socialites. He walked into the center of the ballroom, a shotgun in his hands, his face a mask of righteous fury. "Party's over," he roared. The security team dived for their weapons, but Han was already in the rafters, dropping flashbangs that turned the room into a whiteout of noise and light. Jin-ho moved through the chaos, the shotgun barking as he cleared a path toward the stage. He wasn't aiming for the guards anymore. He was aiming for the foundation. He reached the stage just as the chairman pulled a small derringer from his waistcoat, pointing it at Min-soo's head. "One more step, Jin-ho, and the Han line ends right here." Jin-ho stopped. He lowered the shotgun. The ballroom was silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the guests and the distant wail of sirens. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the chip. "You want the legacy? Here it is. The names, the accounts, the blood. It's all here." He held it over a decorative fire pit. "Let the boy go or I turn your entire kingdom into smoke." The chairman's hand shook. The aristocratic mask finally crumbled, revealing the desperate, hollow old man beneath. "You wouldn't? You built that kingdom with me." "I built it on graves," Jin-ho said. "I'm done digging." He let the chip fall. It hit the embers and flared with a brilliant green light, the data of a lifetime vanishing in a hiss of silicon. The chairman let out a strangled cry, his hand dropping. Jin-ho didn't hesitate. He lunged, scooping Min-soo into his arms, shielding the boy as the first police units breached the doors. The aftermath was a blur of blue lights and cold rain. The chairman was led away in zip ties, his legacy a smoldering ruin on the floor of his own ballroom. The elite of Seoul scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal, but Jin-ho didn't look at them. He sat on the back of an ambulance, a shock blanket wrapped around his shoulders, Min-soo tucked firmly under his arm. Han stood nearby, talking to a detective he'd known since the academy. He looked back at Jin-ho and gave a small, weary nod. The debt was paid. The ghosts were quiet. "Where are we going now?" Min-soo asked, his voice no longer a whisper. He looked at Jin-ho and for the first time he didn't see a predator. He saw a father. Jin-ho looked at the sunrise breaking over the Han River, the light catching the silver locket around the boy's neck. He didn't have a throne anymore. He didn't have an empire. He had a scarred shoulder, a broken rib, and a future he had to build from scratch. "We're going to find a place with a park," Jin-ho said, his voice warm for the first time in 20 years. "And a fence that isn't rusted. And maybe a new dinosaur." Subscribe if you want to hear more stories about people who risked everything to do what was right. Jin-ho stood up, the weight of the boy in his arms feeling like a blessing. He walked toward the horizon, leaving the shadows of the syndicate behind him. He wasn't the king of the underworld anymore. He was just a man walking a boy home. The city of Seoul hummed around them, a monster of glass and steel that would always have its secrets. But for Jin-ho and Min-soo, the dark was finally over. As they walked, the boy reached up and touched the scar on Jin-ho's jaw. "You saved me," he whispered. Jin-ho looked at the boy and realized the truth. "No, Min-soo," he said, his heart finally whole. "You saved me." He didn't look back at the iron estate. He didn't look back at the blood in the alley. He just kept walking one step at a time, into the light of a world that was finally, truly, theirs. The plastic dinosaur fell from the boy's hand as he drifted to sleep against Jin-ho's shoulder, hitting the pavement with a soft click. Jin-ho didn't leave it. He knelt, picked it up and tucked it into his pocket. A small piece of a childhood he would spend the rest of his life protecting. The rain stopped. The sun hit the water of the river, turning it into a sheet of gold. Jin-ho took a deep breath of the cold, clean air and smiled. The monster was gone. The man remained.